So you must have heard that on Lag BaOmer, massive crowds come to Meron, to the grave of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. It must be the most celebrated, assumed Yortzeit anywhere in the world, or maybe in history. There's thousands of people come to Meron on that day. This year it's going to be a problem. It's a Friday. I don't know. It's impossible to get there and back for Shabbos because the enormous crowds, the roads leading there to there and back are not designed for that sort of thousands of people coming along. The Israeli police has a big problem in getting people to park far away and having buses. Anyway, it's the biggest celebrated Yortzeit. But we have to know why. It so happens, and I'll mention to you later, that it's probably not his Yortzeit. It's a mistake. It's more likely this was the day when he celebrated during the Omer, because of the, the days of the Omer correspond to combinations of midot, of qualities of Hashem, and that combination, Hod Shebehod, for some reason he felt it meant something to his neshama. But anyway, whatever it is, this is one of the big convocations, gatherings of Jews on a regular basis in at the grave of a great tzaddik. As far as I know, the only other one who's got such massive numbers is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, but that's certainly not his Yortzeit. It's on Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, why was he so special, and why do so many people want to go to visit his grave on that day? So in fact, he was one of the very great personalities in Jewish history, and he made a profound impact on the future. But I want to run you through his history and the history of the times in which he lived, to see who he was and what was the impact which is so powerful that so many people want to go and celebrate at his grave. So one of the lessons we learn from here is that he grew great in spite of tremendous suffering, turbulence, Roman cruelty during his time. The Romans sort of got their claws onto Israel around 110 before the Common Era, which is 180 years before they finally destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. By the time they destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, they've been there 180 years. It's a long, long time. If you go back 180 years from now, it's going to take you back into 1860. It's a long, long time ago. Most of us will not know the names of our great-great-great-grandparents 180 years ago. It's a long time. So on the 9th of Av of the year 70, the Romans destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. And you must know the story. Before the Romans destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had himself smuggled out of Yerushalayim, pretending to be dead in a coffin, or pretending to be a dead body, and he went to speak to Vespasian, the general in charge of the siege, and he managed to appease him and flatter him and get him to agree to spare the yeshiva of Yavne. He didn't try to save Yerushalayim. He didn't try to save Beis Hamikdash. He knew it was a lost cause. He just went to save a yeshiva in Yavne, from which he hoped and succeeded to rebuild the whole Jewish nation. So he succeeded. He got permission, and he reestablished the Sanhedrin, which is the supreme judicial and legislative court of the Jews. That he managed to reestablish it in Yavne. And it's made up of 71 Chachamim, and they are the only ones allowed to rule on cases which a lower regional courts couldn't. And generally they made laws for the nation and looked after the government of the nation, appointed Rabbonim, Dayanim around the country, And initially, the Romans were not aware of the power of the Sanhedrin. They realized there was something there, but didn't realize the full power. However, the early Christians were very spiteful and hateful of the religious Jews, and they kept on running and tittle-tallying. Was that the word? Tittle? I've forgotten the word. Anyway, bringing Lashon Hara to the Romans and saying the Jews are rebelling, the Jews are against you. That's why we have the tefillah of La Malshinim, no hope for the slanderers. These were early Christians. That bracha was made specifically against the Christians. So anyway, so Rabbi Yochai ben Zakkai re-establishes the Sanhedrin in Yavne. It was a mega point in the saving of the Jewish nation. And about 10 years after the Churban, Rabbi Yochai ben Zakkai passed away. And shortly after, a new emperor came up in Rome, and his name was Domitian. And he was a murderer, right, left, and center. There was a lot of persecution and murder of Jews. He murdered Jews suspected of Jewish sympathies. He was a murderer. So it was during these times, sometime in the reign of this bloody reign of this emperor, that somebody called Yochai had a son, called him Shimon. We don't know much about his mother, other than maybe humorously, there's a record that when Rabbi Shimon's mother would chat too much on Shabbos, he would remind her gently and politely and respectfully that on the Shabbos is not for so much chatting, whatever. Anyway, so Yochai was the father. And by now, the whole country had been overrun with hostile Romans and Greeks. There was Romans and Greeks everywhere, and Jews were being persecuted in their own land. The emperor Domitian attempted to have Rabban Gamliel murdered. Rabban Gamliel was the Nasi. He was a descendant of Hillel, who led the nations sort of politically as well as halachically. And he wanted to get him murdered. Rabban Gamliel had to go into hiding. A sympathetic Roman came and told him, disappear for a while. Anyway, so there was the yeshiva in Yavne, but the Sanhedrin could only meet on rare occasion. And the church historians, you may have heard of him, Eusebius, writes that Domitian issued a command that the house of David be exterminated. So around about these times, and all these persecutions are carrying on, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is born. And around about the year 85 of the Common Era, about 15 years after the Churban. And a few years later, when he was about 13, till the year 117, for about 19 years, there was another emperor called Trajan, and he was persecuting and killing right, left, and center. So I'm telling you all this to realize Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was born in a time of murder, persecution, trampling on the Jews. The Rome was at war with the Parthians in Iraq, in the east of Israel. And Trajan needed Israel as a base for his campaign. He didn't want insurrection behind his lines. Instead of appeasing, he oppressed. So there's a lot of oppression going on. We have a record of a halacha which was discussed at this time, which is significant. They had to discuss and debate and vote and conclude, should one allow oneself to be killed by the Romans if the Romans say violate the halacha? And that's when the famous halacha was enunciated. Whatever they tell you to do, allow yourself to be killed, except for idolatry, immorality, and murder. This is a sort of halacha which was being asked of the Rabbonim in those days. What do I do when they threaten to kill me for doing mitzvahs? So all this persecution by Trajan, the second of the three big persecutors, they were all persecutors, but almost all of them. Trajan was the second in line of the big ones. Around about when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was 13, his bar mitzvah year, and it carried on till he was about 32. So from 13 to 32, he was living under Trajan with all the associated persecutions, and then came worse times. Then came Hadrian. Hadrian was the worst of the worst of the worst. Many of you may have visited Hadrian's Wall in Northumbria, north of Newcastle. That's all that's left. He was one of the wicked names in Jewish history. So what are we saying? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, at the key time in a person's life, when one is a yeshiva bocher and then a young kollel man and is studying, he was living in very, very troubled, turbulent times. And nevertheless, he persevered. He persevered in his learning. We find him around about the age of 15. He is a student attending Yavne and the Sanhedrin as an observer. He had to be appointed to the Sanhedrin, but students could go along and sit in the Beis HaMedrash and listen and learn. And that's how people became great gradually. They sat in and listened to what's going on. It's like today, pupillage for lawyers or and so on. So at that time, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai triggered off a big controversy in the Sanhedrin. He went to Rabbi Yeshua, who was the leader of the Beis Din, and he asked him, is Ma'ariv obligatory or a voluntary prayer? And Rabbi Yeshua said it's voluntary. Then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, not Rabbi yet, Shimon, went to ask Rabban Gamliel, the Nasi, the leader of the nation, is Ma'ariv obligatory or voluntary? And he says it's obligatory. But Rabbi Yeshua said it's voluntary. And there was a big upheaval the next day in the Sanhedrin when it was brought up. Big upheavals. So we see here as a determined young man, age 15, he wants to know the halacha. He asks this one, he asks that one. He tries to bring it to a conclusion. Anyway, much later, or not later, I don't know how much later, he spent 13 years after he got married studying under Rabbi Akiva. So you know the story how Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 Talmidim during the time of now, during the Sefira time. And this was the bulk of the scholars, the future of the Jewish nation. It was a big mega tragedy. This was plague. This was not Roman persecution. It was plague. And Rabbi Akiva was left without a yeshiva. He left the north in the Galil. He went south to the south of Yehuda, to the desert of Yehuda, and there he found 5 young scholars. And the names should be familiar to you. Rabbi Meir, you've all heard of Rabbi Meir Balanes. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eli, you may not have heard of. Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon was one of them. And Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua. 5 young men, and he started teaching them. He went back to square one, Rabbi Akiva, and started building up future leaders with these 5. And these 5 were the ones who went on to then re-establish the Torah in the nation. Rabbi Shimon was one of them. So he was there for 13 years studying under Rabbi Akiva, who gave him smicha at a very young age. And people didn't recognize it. He was so young. He got smicha again later. Rabbi Akiva recognized his greatness, and he said to him, just God and I know your potential. Don't worry if other people don't realize it. I know your potential, God knows your potential. So he is studying at times when there's persecution going on, and then Heinrich comes along, and Heinrich starts off as a benevolent ruler. And he says he would allow the Jews to rebuild the temple, and there was a tremendous excitement amongst the Jews. Wow, he's going to build the Beis HaMikdash. It was very, very exciting. What happened? The Samaritans heard this. If anybody ever tells you about good Samaritans, don't believe them. They were not good. Why are they called today good Samaritans? I'll tell you why. Because the Christians who hated the Jews are the bad ones, the Samaritans are the good ones. It's just an anti-Jewish phrase to say good Samaritans. They're not good. They went to Hadrian and said, if you let them build a temple, they'll rebel against you and so on. So they turned the emperor against us. So at all times, the Christians, from a very early stage, they were turning the Romans against us, and the Samaritans were even longer. And now Hadrian started with tremendous anti-Torah decrees. He wanted to civilize the Jews and assimilate the Jews into his empire. And he made 3 imperial decrees which are high-level laws, decrees, which are very powerful and very binding and can't just be ignored. He forbade Shabbos, he forbade bris milah, and he forbade mikveh. So if Jews are caught keeping Shabbos, they could be killed. If Jews are caught doing bris to their children, they could be killed. And if women or men were found going to the mikveh, they would be killed. These were imperial decrees, and we'll come back to these imperial decrees later. They also were forbidding other mitzvahs like saying Shema. This was the time of Shmad, out to destroy the Jews. And this is the atmosphere in which Rabbi Shimon lived in his 20s, 30s, into his 40s. Things were pretty bad. The Romans built a temple to Jupiter on the site of the Beis Hamikdash. It was the ultimate insult. So Rabbi Shimon is living in times of virtually constant persecution. He's living under occupation. It's forbidden to study Torah, and it doesn't stop. So one of the major lessons we learn from him is that we devote ourselves to Torah mitzvahs, whatever the consequences, even under conditions of persecution. Anyway, things went from bad to worse with Hadrian. It was so bad, the persecution of Yiddishkeit, that in the end, Bar Kokhba led a revolt. It was not a political revolt. It was a religious revolt. They revolted because they were not allowed to keep the Torah mitzvahs. So Bar Kokhba, as you know, captured Yerushalayim. Then the Romans retook Yerushalayim. Then Bar Kokhba was in Betar, which was besieged by the Romans for a long, long time. And in the end, Betar fell also on the 9th of Av. And the Romans were all out to make the whole of the province of Judea desolate, destroying crops, destroying farms, destroying villages, destroying everything. Israel was a very, very wooded, fertile country. The Romans just cut down more trees, more. In the end, they devastated the land. And then they made a decree: the dead of Betar may not be married. So for years, Jews were walking around the countryside, seeing dead Jews lying all over the place. It was a ness, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did, the bodies did not decompose, but they were lying there. And we remember this regularly. When you say Birkas Hamazon, and you make a bracha Hatoy v'Hameitiv, that bracha was instituted by the Chachamim of Yavne when permission was finally given many years later to bury the dead of Betar. So it was such a great relief for us. Chazal fixed the bracha into benching. That bracha has nothing to do with the eating. It's got to do with remembering the kindness of Hashem. So all this time is called the generation of Shmad, the generation Dor Shmad, extermination, annihilation, persecution of sages, of scholars, or anybody keeping mitzvahs. Many Talmidei Chachamim just fled to Babylon, and Samicha was forbidden. The Chachamim could no longer give Samicha to continue to perpetuate the transmission of halacha from Moshe Rabbeinu and the psakim, the decisions which depended entirely on smicha. So now they started forbidding more mitzvahs. Tefillin, you get killed. Read Megillah, get killed. Eat matzah, you get killed. Make a sukkah, you get killed. You take a lulav, you get killed. You read the Torah in shul, or put on tzitzis, all these things. And the public teaching of Torah was outlawed. All the schools, Chadorim, were all closed down by the Romans. They had to go underground. Death penalty. This is the times in which Rabbi Shimon is growing and developing. It's very interesting to see how in the worst times, in different periods of history, great Jews have emerged in spite of all, maybe because of the difficulties. Anyway, Rabbi Shimon is now in his 40s, and his Rabbi, the great Rabbi of the whole of the Jewish nation by now, Rabbi Akiva, is in jail, pending execution for teaching Torah. So Rabbi Shimon goes to jail and asks him questions. He wants to know halacha. He wants the Masorah, the transmission. And Rabbi Akiva says, "You're endangering yourself. I can't tell you. If you get caught here speaking to me, I don't know whether it was through the window or what it was, you're in big trouble." And Shimon said, "I've got to learn. I can't not learn. It's survival." And Rabbi Akiva made a very famous statement. You may have heard it. More than the calf wishes to suck, the cow wishes to suckle. I know you want to learn. I'm even more keen to teach you, but it's dangerous. In the end, he managed to get Rabbi Akiva to teach him some things. Anyway, in the end, Rabbi Akiva is executed. You know about that. And all around the country, Chachamim are being killed where they can be found. And Shimon himself is in danger. But these people still carry on teaching. You can't stop the Jews from learning and teaching Torah. Then the Romans said, if anybody gives smicha, it'll be on pain of death. And if anybody receives smicha, it'll be on pain of death. And there's a record of a certain Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. He's one of the 10 Haruge Malchus. You may have noticed his name on Yom Kippur in the Piyut on the 10 who were killed by the Romans. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was just about the only man left now with smicha. He knew he has to give smicha to the next generation. So he got hold of these famous 5 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shemua, and he's going to give them smicha. But it's a very dangerous thing to do. So what did he do? Since the Romans had said, whoever gives smicha will be killed, whoever receives smicha will be killed, the city in which smicha is given will be destroyed, and the whole environ, the whole surrounding area will be devastated. So what did he do? He went somewhere in the Galil, and he found a place between 2 massive mountains, in other words, in the middle of nowhere, and between 2 very, very big cities, equidistant from these 2 big cities, and between Usha and Sheparam. Usha is there, I know, I've been through it. I'm not sure if Sheparam is there or not. I don't know if any of you know. Anyway, so, and there he gave smicha to the 5 great Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. But somebody spilled the beans, I suspect. I'm not being choshev bakasherim when I suspect the Christians, because they were the ones who were constantly running to tell Romans all sorts of bad things about it. So the Romans approached. So Rabbi Yehuda says to the 5 young men, run. And they said, what about you? He was an old man. He couldn't run. He said, look, what can I do? You have to save yourselves. I'm here. I'm lying here like a stone. I can't do anything. I haven't got the energy. So the 5 of them fled. And the Romans came and they just riddled his body, Nebuch. They riddled his body with lances and spears. Anyway, finally Hadrian dies, Baruch Hashem, and things start relaxing a bit. But there's still a governor there, Tinius Rufus, and he continues the persecutions. Rabbi Shimon doesn't stop. He develops and he grows. Then there comes a bit of a quiet period when Antoninus was the emperor. He's known as Antoninus Pius. He seems to be a good man, and things were quiet for a while. Later on, we find somebody else called Antoninus. He was his adopted son. That was later. That was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. There was a different one. This is the adoptive father. And the Chachamim started coming back from Babylon. And they managed to shift the responsibilities for leading the nation away from Babylon back to Israel. Because during this time, they could not fix the calendar. Especially to make the decision about which year will be a leap year with an extra Adar. And it was being done by a nephew of Rabbi Yeshua in Babylon. But then when these 5 young men were already competent, they sent a message to Babylon, to the nephew of Rabbi Yeshua. They sent 2 messengers to say, it's time to shift the responsibility back to Israel. He didn't want to, he didn't know why, and they told him, well, when you left, there were little kid goats there. Today, there's big rams. In other words, the young men have grown into great people. So in the end, he was encouraged by one of the Bembeterah family, and he ran after the messengers, and he got the messengers. He said, "I agree," and So now it's Rabbi Shimon and his colleagues who are taking over the leadership of the Jewish nation in Israel. Now, Antoninus repealed a lot of the extra prohibitions which had been made later in Hadrian's time. But the first three, Shabbos, Milah, and Mikveh, were imperial decrees, and those remained in the law books. So something has to be done about it. How are they going to repeal? They were not being imposed, they were not being applied, but it was too dangerous to leave these prohibitions, Shabbos, Milah, Mikveh, to leave these the law books. So something had to be done. So what are we going to do? So people said, look, we'll have to send Rabbi Shimon to Rome to do something about it. And why him? They said, Melumad Benisim. We can see he can perform miracles. By then, Rabbi Shimon was already on such a high level that he was able to make changes to the natural world. So we need somebody who's a miracle worker to go and they tried before with somebody else. One of the Chachamim gave himself a Roman haircut and sort of what do you call it? What the women call it? Makeup or makeover? Makeover. And he pretended to be a Roman, and he went and spoke, and he managed to get them to stop the decree on Shabbos and the one on Milah and the one on Mikvah. And then they caught him out there. You're a Jew, and he had to flee and run away. So the laws are still imperial decrees in Rome. So let's send Rabbi Shimon because he can perform miracles. And together with him, they sent Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi. So two of them went out. On the way there, they were met by somebody called Ben Demalion. Now, I'm not going to get too much into detail because I don't know. Ben Demalion is what's called a shed, which is translated as a demon, but I don't think it's the correct translation. It's not a malach, but it's not a person. It's some sort of a being, semi-spiritual being in between. And he came and he met them. And he says, shall I come and help you? And Rabbi Shimon was very, very distressed. And he said, the maid of Sarah, Hagar, when she was in the desert, 3 times a malach came to her. And I'm going now on behalf of the Jewish nation, and I don't even get one malach. But what can I do? If this is all the help I get, this is what I get. The next has to be done. So he said to Ben Temalion, okay, fine, let's go. So what did he do? This Ben Temalion, he entered into Caesar's daughter, possessed her, and she went insane. When Rabbi Shimon arrived in Rome, he went as the delegation from the leading generation, the delegation of Jews from Israel comes to speak to the Romans. He goes to the emperor's palace, and there's trouble. The emperor's daughter is in a bad state. He says, I can do something about it. So he went up to the emperor's daughter and he says, Ben Temalion, you can leave now. And he left. And now the girl's fine. And the emperor is very, very, very grateful. And he says, go into my treasure house and take whatever you want. They went in. They didn't take pearls. They didn't take diamonds. They didn't take gold, jewels. They searched for the archives. And they found the imperial decrees and they tore them up. Baruch Hashem. So now the Jews can safely keep Shabbos, Milah, and Mikveh. So this is one of the nisim that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was able to achieve. And we find in the Gemara that a certain rabbi in Rome, teaching at something, he says, I heard this from Rabbi Shimon when he was in Rome. He was teaching the Jewish community there when he was there as well. So anyway, slowly in Israel, a teaching of Torah is cautiously introduced, convening of assemblies. They finally got permission from Rome to bury the dead, and that's when the Baruch HaTov HaMeitiv was instituted. And now comes a very famous incident in Rabbi Shimon's life. It's still not the final reason why he's so famous. I haven't come to that yet. Rabbi Yehuda, one of the 5 colleagues, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, another one of the 5 colleagues, and Rabbi Shimon, 3 of them were together. And there was somebody else present, a certain Yehuda, And Rabbi Yehuda, also called Yehuda, not Rabbi Yehuda, another one, a man called Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, he said, look, the Romans are doing well now. They've rebuilding the country. They've made buildings and marketplaces and open spaces and urban development. They've made bridges. They've made bathhouses. They are developing the country. We have to appreciate it. And Rabbi Yossi said nothing. Rabbi Shimon says, whatever they do for themselves. They're not trying to make our country good, only for themselves. All these urban developments is so they can have brothels there. That's the only reason why they want it. The bathhouses, so they can sit and enjoy themselves and soak and relax in the bathhouses. And the bridges, so they can take taxes, toll bridges. So that was the conversation. Rabbi Yehuda looked at the good. Rabbi Shimon looked deeper and said, really, they're rotten. The other guy called Yehuda went and told his family, oh, no, look, this is Divrei Torah. Rabbi Yehuda says this, Rabbi Shimon says that. And somebody told somebody who told somebody, and in the end, again, it got to the Romans. Again, I suspect some Christian along the way. Don't forget, the Christians, they were Jews. And they were trying to be Jews who believed in Yoshke. And they were mixing, and they were going into the shuls. Anyway, the Romans found out. So the Romans said, Rabbi Yehuda, who said we are great, he'd be made the leader of the Jewish nation. Rabbi Yossi, who said nothing, we're sending him into exile to Tzipori. And Shimon has to be killed. Right? There's a death sort of warrant issued for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So he takes his son with him, Elazar, and they hide themselves in the Beis HaMedrash. They don't go out, just go into Beis HaMedrash and stay there learning all day. And the wives, 2 wives, would come every day and bring them bake. In those days, women used to bake loaves of bread for the family every day, every morning. So the wives used to bring a loaf of bread and a bottle of water, a jug of water. So they lived in the Beis HaMedrash, just eating bread and water. But then the search got more intense. So Rabbi Shimon said to his son, look, what happens is they catch our wives and torture them. And if they torture them enough, you never know, they might succumb under torture and they might say where we are. So they ran away. And they found a cave and they hid in a cave. And Hashem made a miracle for them. And a carob tree grew there and a spring of water came up. So they were able to eat carobs and drink water for 12 years. Carobs and water for 12 years. They dare not let the clothes wear away. So they used to take their clothes off every day and dig a hole in the sand in the cave, sit in the sand, cover themselves in sand up to their neck, and spend the whole day learning, revising. There was no books then, it was all by memory. Learning Torah, except for davening times. You used to come out of the sand, put the clothes on, daven, and go back again into the sand. To protect the clothes, it should last long enough. 12 years. After 12 years, Eliyahu Novi came and stood at the entrance to the cave and he said, will anybody please tell Bar Yochai that Caesar has died and the law has been suspended? So they came out. Now they've been in isolation. Common word today. They've been in isolation, learning Torah only and davening, and that's it, for 12 years. They were totally out of contact with society. And they saw people plowing and sowing. And Rabbi Shimon said, what's going on here? People, instead of learning Torah, they're plowing and sowing and looking after worldly life. And they glared wherever they went, and they burned up the environment with the looks of such disdain, physically harming. And a voice came from heaven and said, I didn't let you out to destroy the world, go back. They went back to the cave, another year, a whole year. After another year, they said, we know that Rishonim are only judging Gehenna for 12 months. We've been here for 12 months, that's it, it's enough. And a voice came from heaven and said, yeah, you can leave the cave. they came out. Rabbi Elazar was still very fiery, and wherever he looked, he was still causing damage. Rabbi Shimon had already sort of mellowed, and he was able to cure what his son was harming. And he said, look, people have to lead the lives the way they do. It's enough that you and me are in the world that we can keep sort of the power of Torah going. One Friday afternoon, imminently, after they come out, they saw an old man running with 2 bundles of myrtles, and he was close to Shabbos. And they said, well, what's all these myrtles for? He said, covered Shabbos. So 1 bundle is enough. Why 2? No, 1 for Zachor and 1 for Shamor. So Rabbi Shimon says to his son, see how much the Jews love mitzvahs. They were consoled when they realized that all the people were not so involved in learning, and they were involved in agriculture, but nevertheless they still cared for the mitzvahs. Now, his father-in-law, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, heard that Rabbi Shimon is back in circulation. He came to meet him, of course, and he took him to a bathhouse, and he'd not been in the bathhouse for 13 years. I mean, obviously they were washing themselves in the spring, but he'd not been in a proper bath, in a hot bath, for 13 years. So he took him to the bathhouse, and he helped him to undress to get into the bath, and his skin was all cracked, shriveled, dry, cracked from so many years sitting in sand. And Rabbi Pinchas started crying when he saw this, and the tears landed on the cracks in the skin, and it hurt him. And Rabbi Pinchas was very distressed. Oh, woe to me that I see you like this. And I says, no, woe to me you had not seen me like this, because what's the difference? Till now, till they went into the cave, if Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, if Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai had asked a question, Rabbi Pinchas gave him 12 answers. Now it's the other way around. If Rabbi Pinchas asked a question, Rabbi Shimon could give him 24 answers. So Rabbi Shimon grew tremendously, quadrupled his capacity in the time he was in that cave. Anyway, he's out of the cave now, and it's still dangerous for him to join the Sanhedrin. He's sort of got a criminal record, so to speak. So he goes to a town called Tekoa, and he opens a yeshiva there. And the Nasi at the time, the prince of the nation at the time, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, sent him his brilliant, saintly young son, Yehuda, to learn in that yeshiva. This was to be the future Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who edited the Mishnah. So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was his Rabbi when he was a yeshiva bocher. Now, we don't know precisely when he died, round about the year 165, 170. And people think he died on the third day of the Omer. That's most likely not true. Most serious authorities say it's a mistake. It's based on a printing mistake in one of the early books of Arizal. Arizal said that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai samach, rejoiced on Lag BaOmer. And in fact, Arizal used to go to the grave on Lag BaOmer. And the printer made a mistake, and instead of printing Samach Shin Mem Chet, he printed Shin Mem Taf, which reads Shemet. So in that first edition, there was a mistake, and people thought that is Yochai. And most people still think that is Yochai, but it's more likely not. Okay, so he was a great person, but why is he that great? All his colleagues are very great. Why is he that great that we make such a fuss of him more than anybody else? More than Rabbi Akiva, more than Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Why such a big fuss? And the answer is because, in a sense, his impact was greater than his contemporaries. He may not have been greater. He was great, but we can't judge whether he's greater than Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was also gigantic. His impact was greater than most of his contemporaries because he developed the mystical teachings he had received from Rabbi Akiva, the Kabbalah, he had received Rabbi Akiva, who had received from Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, the great Rabbi Eliezer, who had received from Yochanan ben Zakkai, who had received from Hillel. He had a direct transmission of the mystical. Rabbi Akiva also knew it, of course he knew it. And Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yochanan, they all knew it. But so why is Rabbi Shimon the one who makes the impact? It's interesting, Rabbi Eliezer, who taught Rabbi Akiva, who taught Rabbi Shimon, said, before he died, he said, I learned a lot from my teachers. Harbe Torah lamati. I've learned a lot of Torah from my teachers, and I've taught a lot of Torah. But as much as I learned, I didn't take from them even as much as a dog who lacks from the sea. The dog laps up some water from the sea. How much has he depleted the sea? That's how much I took from my teachers. And I taught a lot. And you know how much my Talmidim received from me? As much as a woman gets when she puts a little rod into the mascara, or into the ointment she puts on her eyes, and she draws out a little bit and puts it in her eyes. That's how much they got from me. They had incredible levels of Torah. So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, fine. He wasn't the only one, but he had received this Kabbalah. During the 12 years in the cave, when they spent time learning Torah, they were meditating on these mystical concepts with no distraction. And he achieved great heights of mystical experience and insight. And subsequently, he taught these secrets. Why do we call it secrets? Because the Torah can be learned at 4 different levels. There is Peshat, the simple reading, which we all have to do. Then comes the Remez, the hints, like Gematria. Then comes the Drosh, like Midrash Rabbah, like the Rashot. And then comes the Sod, which is the elaboration of the teachings of the prophets and the mystical experiences. Why are they called secret? Because you can't understand it unless you've been through the first 3 levels. And not everybody gets to the first 3 levels. And on top of that, it needs a lot of personal development and in mitzvahs and so on. There's a story going about a certain man who went to a Kabbalist in Spain about 800-900 years ago. He said, I want to learn Kabbalah. So he said to him, are you ready for it? He said, I think so. He says, if somebody insults you or somebody compliments you, does it make any difference to you in your emotions, whether you are insulted or complimented? He says, yes, I do feel it. So in which case you can't learn Kabbalah. You have to transcend your emotions, your ego feelings completely. Anyway, whatever it was, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai spent time teaching these secrets to a lot of Chaverim, he called them, a lot of them. And he had one disciple there, a Babylonian Rabbi Abba, who wrote down in Aramaic, he's from Babylon, he wrote in Aramaic, wrote down all the teachings of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So these were recorded in writing. And it includes discussions which took place in the presence of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and his Chaverim with the neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu, who used to come to their yeshiva and learn with them and teach them. So all this was discussed by Rabbi Shimon and his colleagues and recorded by Rabbi Abba. But it was kept under wraps. It wasn't shared. And this collection of teaching was passed down confidentially throughout the generations. A select few sages would have access to it and pass it on to the next generation, but never making it public. We find odd bits and pieces quoted in the writings of the Gaonim of Babylon and in the Rishonim, the generations, but as a collection, fragments are found, quotations are found, but not as a collection. We don't know what happened to this collection of teachings, this book of teachings between the days of Rabbi Abba for about 1,200 years, 1,100 years. It existed, but very few people knew about it. And if they knew about it, they wouldn't talk about it. And then it appears in Spain at the end of the 13th century, in the late 1200s. How did it appear? there was a Kabbalist there. Kabbalah existed without. Kabbalah has always been there. There was a Kabbalist called Rabbi Moshe de Leon. Leon is an area in Spain, a district in Spain. Rabbi Moshe de Leon, he earned his living as a traveling scribe. In those days, no printing. If you had a manuscript and you wanted to share it or pass it on, you needed to pay somebody to copy it, handwritten. So there was lots of, today we have scribes for Sefer Torah, for Tefillin. In those days, there were scribes for Gemara, for Chumash. All books had to be transcribed by hand. So he made his living by going to rich people's homes and copying manuscripts. And in one of these places, he discovered a manuscript and he realized this is a major collection of Rabbi Shimon's teachings. Being a Kabbalist himself, he realized the importance of it. So he copied it, and he copied it again and again, and he started disseminating it. And then a controversy arose. Is this genuine? This has not been known for 1,200 years. Is it genuine? And there was a lot of controversy. So people went to his widow and asked her, what's going on? And she said, oh, he wrote it himself. Now, this really put a spanner in the works. Historians are still trying to work out why should she say that? Because in the end, she was wrong. Either she did not know what was going on, or maybe she had sold some of the pages as scrap paper to support herself, and she was embarrassed to say so. Whatever it is, she said, he wrote, I saw him write it himself. And so here we have a mega manuscript, very important, but is it genuine? So the great sages of the time decided they have to make an investigation. So they called upon a certain Rabbi Yitzchak who had come from Akko. At that time, till then, there had been a settlement of French Rabbonim, hundreds of them went to live in Akko. And in the end, they had to flee because the Crusaders made life difficult for them. But anyway, this Rabbi Yitzchak of Akko, he was a very celebrated Kabbalist, and he was back in Spain. So he spoke to the widow, and he examined the book, and he studied the book, and in the end he came to the conclusion, this is genuine. And that was accepted by many, many people. Now, this became the major textbook of Jewish Kabbalah available in writing. There were a couple of smaller works before that, but they were very, very tiny, completely different, or very different. This is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai makes his impact, and this is why so many thousands of people congregate. Great Torah scholars have made a critical comparison between this book, it's called the Zohar, and Rabbi Moshe de Leon's own Kabbalistic works. And they show his Kabbalah differs tremendously from the traditions of the Zohar. It's two totally different approaches. So it's clear that Moshe did not invent this. He genuinely, sincerely copied a genuine manuscript. And for a long time, there was criticism in force. And of course, the people who are anti-Judaism and so on, they like to say that it's a forgery. But all mainstream Torah scholars today accept it as genuine. Hardly anybody can still insist on saying that it's a forgery. And great people have studied it, and they've grown great as a result of studying it. So this publication had a major influence in shifting Judaism and the way of thinking from a philosophically oriented religion to a mystically oriented religion. Till then, the great scholars had tackled Judaism from a philosophical approach. Rambam, Ralbag, Rav Levi ben Gershon, some of the Gaonim in Babylon. That was the style of thinking. Now it shifts away from a philosophical approach to a mystical approach. And generations of expert Kabbalists have studied it and developed through it. And the greatest was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria Ashkenazi, Arizal. He was born in Israel. His father was a Luria and Ashkenazi. His mother was a Sephardi, a woman in Israel. The father died when he was young. The mother took him and went to her brother who lived in Egypt. His uncle looked after them, and he studied with the great Spanish scholars who had arrived in Egypt after the expulsion. And then once he got married, his uncle built him a meditation hut next to the Nile, and he used to go every Sunday he used to go and spend time by himself meditating on the Zohar and coming back home for Shabbos. And he became great through his study of the Zohar. Then he moved back to Israel and he started teaching, and everybody realized this is it. Nobody has understood the Zohar as well as he has, and has gone to such great heights of holiness and achievement and understanding like he has. And his disciples started spreading his practices based on Kabbalah, and especially amongst the Sephardi, but it also went to Europe as well. So it was the Zohar, when it appeared in the 13th century, when it was 200 years later, it was sort of popularized by Arizal. And hang on, we haven't finished yet on the impact. Then the Spanish Kabbalists who fled Spain in 1492, many of them went to Tzfat. Many went to Turkey, many went to North Africa, some went to Europe. And there was a continuation of Kabbalah Spanish Kabbalah teaching based on the Zohar, which carried on through. In the end, they just sort of assimilated and integrated with Ashkenazim there, but they carried on passing on this system of learning. And this was then taken up by the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov started using the Zohar and the writings of Arizal, and they founded the Hasidic movement, which made such a big impact on the whole of the Jewish world. So now we've come to the point where we see why Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is so pivotal in the development of Judaism till today. And our whole Yiddishkeit today is highly influenced by the Zohar, by this Kabbalah, which was discovered in Spain and spread through Europe. And they're used by the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezrich and the Talmidim, the Elimelech, Rashi Zalman, they were spreading. And today we have a multitude of Kabbalistic practices. For some reason, the Sephardi Kabbalists felt that the practices should be popularized to the public. And the Hasidim also have. So the impact of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai has been that. The impact only came out and changed the whole direction of Jewish thought from philosophical to mystical. It all came from the Zohar. The Zohar contains deep ideas which are unintelligible unless you've been trained in it, but it also contains simple ideas like midrashim, which are even simpler than the Midrash Rabbah. Among Sephardim, it's more common for people to read it. They don't have this. Among Ashkenazim, it was decided nobody under 40 should touch it, but the Sephardim didn't have that. So young Sephardim also look into it. So, but this is the impact. The impact of Shimon bar Yochai is from the time when the Zohar was published, and then it slowly shifted the whole way of thinking of the Jewish nation to what it is today. And so people go to, that's the reason why people go to Meron. That's why, and to celebrate, because of the great impact that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai had through the Zohar. So if you hear of great, well, you're not going to hear of great masses going this year. I can't imagine on a Friday people are going to go to Meron. There's no way of getting back on time for Shabbos. But this was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, his association with Lag BaOmer, and his tremendous impact right through till today on the Yiddishkeit you're familiar with.